Look at this. Such a great turnout. Thanks so much for joining. Um, Unfortunately, we are joining during some dire circumstances, but the reason why I do culture class, and I've been doing it for a year for clients and anybody who can enroll or subscribe. I've always been doing it and what I do for my company, which is Zeitguide, means Guide to the Zeitgeist. Zeitgeist, if you didn't know, is a German word that means spirit of the times. And before the world was in this crazy state, it still wasn't as easy to live in, and there was a lot of anger. In fact, I do a cultural almanac every year. And the first chapter, if you can see, was "The World is on Fire." So before this whole thing happened, I was covering how crazy this constantly changing world that we've been in has been impacting all as business leaders and citizens of the world. One thing I'd love to say is everybody make sure you're on mute so I could continue talking without being interrupted, which I don't think anybody wants me to be interrupted. So I'll move forward. Anyway, so what I've been doing for the last 10 years as the founder of Zeitguide was to guide leaders through our constantly changing culture so they are best equipped for the future. Hoping that I can provide you with the same kind of Zeit guidance I've been doing before today's culture class. And the reason why I'm having this free culture class is not just to finally illuminate what I've been doing forever, but also to provide a way of thinking about where we are and where we could be going. And I don't think anybody really knows. So what I'm trying to do with this culture class, which I do every week, and this one's free, is to make sure everybody's seeing what's happening beyond the breaking news. So whether you're watching CNN, MSNBC, or I don't think there are many Fox News people here, but it's always good to see the other side. It's my job is to kind of look at everything that's been happening throughout the past few days and to kind of give you a big picture, synthesized, dot-connected point of view so that you can see everything that is happening within what we call the Zeitguide's 4 pillars of change. We look at global trends and societal trends. We look at tech trends, we look at consumer trends, and we look at workplace trends. And our approach and our way of doing it is to do what we call our fine filter focus methodology, where we're looking at everything, we're speaking to global experts in every industry, and then we are pointing you to the heartbeat of what matters. And so I've been doing this with clients, and now and I've been doing it with this cultural almanac for more people. And now what I've been doing for clients, I have this culture class where amazingly more people than just one person and their teams can hear what I have to say. So I hope it's valuable to you. I hope it helps you. I hope you keep coming every week and you could, stay on this cultural narrative to see how we are all being impacted, both as business people, professionals, and citizens of the world. I am here to also send you all love and empathy for everybody. These are stressful times. I hope everybody is healthy in your family. And if there's anything I could do is, for 1 hour, 60 minutes, I could provide you distraction or enrichment, hopefully both. And here we're going to go. We're going to the hugest cultural force that many of us have ever experienced in our lifetime. And so right now, everything is going to be funneling up into the big picture of the zeitgeist within the context of the novel coronavirus and its impact on all 4 of these buckets. And to go a little bit more micro, what I'd like to cover in this culture class is, this virus's impact on our health globally, politics, geopolitics. And again, I said that we're going to have DJ Peterson to give us a little bit of insight into what we need to know outside in the wider world. I have been thinking a lot about, even before the last few days, and I've been writing about it in my Zeitguide newsletter, is how the coronavirus has been a signifier of all the problems that have been, characterizing the world that we live in today, pre-coronavirus, whether it's inequality, whether it's our healthcare system, whether it's about racism and hate all over the world, the climate change conversation, and mental health. I would say that these are issues that I was focusing on before coronavirus. And I believe this cultural movement is going to illuminate all of these problems and show the bad side of everything. However, I also feel that this is a good, and we'll see what happens, and if we could focus on that, is a good way to kind of change the direction of all the hardships and negativity that we had before the coronavirus. As I said, the theme of 2020 before this happened was the world's on fire. Protests all over the world. First one we probably were talking about in the mainstream was Hong Kong. Climate change has never been so much part of the conversation. Mental health issues, the highest suicide rates ever, increased 33% since the 90s, and 70% of all suicides actually occur from men. Hashtag Me Too. I could go on, but the world was not a great place. And so I'm hoping to give you all a positive way of looking at everything, is that this could be a time where we sit back and reflect. And once this chaos subsides, and it will at some point, we can use this as a moment to really focus on humanity, because humanity, in the same way that technology disrupted our world in the last decade, humanity is really the only disruptor or thing we need to reboot to make our world a better place. And so I already talked about these global trends that we can reconceptualize and rethink. Tech, one of the big themes I've been talking about in the last few years is what I call the digital paradox, right? I mean, we were really excited about technology, and then all of a sudden the last year, the tech companies seem just as bad as the oil companies in some ways, in terms of how people thought of them, especially in terms of media and fake news and being hacked by Russians or whatever it is, mental health issues, distraction, ADD. Tech has, in the past few years, have shown us that it's not all positive. But I do believe that this is a great time for the tech companies to step up and really show how they could be so positively impactful to all of us. Consumers, well, the one thing that I thought was great before leading up to this was that consumers have more power than ever before. Businesses, especially consumer-facing businesses, have always impacted the consumer and basically interpolated them to think in a particular way. And now consumers have more power than ever before, and they were expecting purpose. Excuse me, there's phlegm in that. Don't worry. And I feel that especially young people have been such a positive force to the world, and they've been this force that has been has been causing us to think differently. And the workplace, I mean, we've seen in the beginning that the workplaces change with ping pong tables and baristas and kegs somewhere and shared workspace and open workspace, and we're more collaborative. And then it led to more women on boards, inclusion, diversity, leading up to more transparency in terms of the money that we make, flexibility, more women leaders, people of different races and ethnicities. So I encourage everybody not to lose sight of that as we move forward. So there's a little bit of positivity. So let's just keep going. We're going to start with health updates. So I'm going to go from different pages and websites and articles that I've read, give you a little bit of insight, and hopefully it'll give you, again, a 360-degree point of view of what's happening right now. So I would say this John Hopkins Corona Resource Center. And oh, by the way, every single website I have in here, we will put in an email follow-up to all the people. And thank you again who are on this Zoom video. That being said, and so you'll have all these links. If you were part of our culture class, you would have access to our Slack channels, and you'll see everything that my team and I have curated. So to just update everybody's, way of thinking. Okay, I hope there we go. All right, there we go. This is basically where we are right now, total deaths and total recovered. And look how it's spread all over the world. Again, obviously I was positive. We're gonna go a little negative, but this is reality. One of the examples of tech companies really stepping up to be patrons to what's happening in terms and supportive of this craziness that's happening in the world. Microsoft, Bing.com. To be honest, I don't know who's been using Bing.com. Maybe this is a way for people to use it to show you in terms of a, negative rendition of it. I just got I love, by the way, Sherry, who's my assistant who's on, say hi. Sherry, you could see these websites, right?
Yes, you can see everything.
All right. Somebody just texted me like I'm in the middle of something I can't get on. Sorry. Okay, great. So Microsoft is an example. Oh, by the way, Sherry at zeitguy.com. If you have any questions and if we have time afterwards, Sherry will, ask these questions and I will try to answer them. So Microsoft, here's a great example of a tech company doing something that is helping us all. If you want to know about what's happening in the rest of the world, many of my clients, especially in the C-suite, and they're all on WhatsApp talking to each other. One of them is a big advertising holding company that I work directly with the C-suite to help them think through these issues. And if you go to the Ministry of Health website, which again, I'll give it to you, you could see how every country is communicating about the healthcare within their countries. And of course, the CDC.gov is a really important one for everybody to know about, which talks about the stages of what is happening as we continue to contend with this crisis. Just wanted to say in terms of, this is from Axios, which I think is a great newsletter to subscribe to, is that with everything that's happening right now, their stress is at an all-time high. I just highlight something just to really think about is that 4 in 5 Americans are worried about it, with twice as many Democrats as Republicans saying that they're very concerned. So I'm quite interested. I think the stat that I also saw was that less than half, so Republicans, half of Republicans compared to how many Democrats. I think 42% of Republicans are worried. I'm talking not candidates. I'm talking about people who identify themselves as Republicans versus 73%. And just on that level of politics, the trust level of the coronavirus is slightly lower than Trump's approval rating, which was at 47%. So his average approval rating usually hovers around 42%, and his approval rating is obviously dwindling as we keep moving forward. One of the interesting insights that I've been, really teaching in terms of, the work that I've been doing is talking about the CEO and the brands as political leaders. Many consumers and citizens of the world don't really feel like they trust. And I think the Edelman Trust Index also said that they trust their leaders to really make the world a better place and really help the world move forward. And that has been a problem. That's why many brands have been stepping in to talk about some of these global issues that leaders or political leaders haven't really stepped up to solve. And who are consumers right now really looking to help them get through this crisis? It's not Sanjay Gupta and Anderson Cooper on CNN. It's not many of the influencers. It's definitely not politicians. But 54% of those surveyed in this Edelman Trust Barometer say that they want their employers to basically email them at least several times a day to tell them what's happening in the world and how them as a company are being contextualized within this crisis. So employees are asking, with all this chaos, for their employers to step up and be their leaders that will help them continue as this crisis develops. So just in terms of back to the healthcare conversation, the one thing that I have been interested in is the development of the vaccine. And China actually said today that they think that they have found a vaccine that might be able to help, and they're going to be testing it. But here in the United States, what's interesting to me is that Moderna is starting to try a coronavirus vaccine. And Moderna is actually a startup. It's not Pfizer. It's not any of the other big pharma companies, but it is a startup that actually is stepping up to the plate, and their stock, because they became public, is increasing. And the trial will enroll 45 healthy adults ages 18 to 55, and they are basically testing it right now. So I just think that in terms of the conversation that I've been having with my clients and my students, between the legacy company and the startup or the emerging company, the 21st century company, and how legacy companies are trying to stay relevant, and emerging companies that are becoming more relevant, for them to survive, for people to actually connect with what they're doing. We know about the big tech companies that people have been really skeptical about. It's interesting to me that the one on the forefront is really doing this is a 21st century company as opposed to a legacy company. And there are 3 other, biotech companies that are, focusing on this: BioNTech, CureVac, and Moderna. So in terms of like vaccines, this is happening just to help everybody. So now that we are here, Americans do not believe what Trump says about the coronavirus poll. 60% of Americans said they were somewhat or very worried about the exposure to coronavirus, including 73% of Democrats, 64% of independents, and just 42% of Republicans. You can see that 42% of Republicans in terms of the trust, and 42% of Republicans who have more fear than what we've been talking about before, that are worried, which I just showed you before. So that's what's happened. The other thing I want to talk about in terms of politics, obviously Super Tuesday again was last night. We saw that Biden was the front runner. I just wanted to say that I love Bernie Sanders. I think it's okay that he's not running. I don't think he could have. Anyway, I won't talk about him. But what I love about what Bernie Sanders did was he really was a whistleblower to show us beforehand about the problems of inequality between the rich and the poor, and the billionaire conversation, also about our healthcare system with Medicare for all. And even though he might not continue in terms of the election, these issues have completely been undercovered by what we've been seeing, with the coronavirus. There have been several articles about, think it's right here. Uh, Sorry. There have been several articles, and I'll put it in Slack, where there's been a disparity between the way that the haves and the have-nots have been dealing with the coronavirus. I saw an article today in the Financial Times that have basically said that, yeah, here's the article. Sorry about that. The tale of the two healthcare systems. There is one person that is a friend of mine who is a concierge doctor, and he's been telling me that it's been so difficult to, to satisfy his clients, and they pay him between $5,000 and $10,000 a year, some $100,000 a year, depending on how much need they have. But the conversation there is, please get me body bags and face masks. And, they're all in their country houses around the world. They have private jets on the tarmac waiting to take them anywhere. And then we have 28 million people in this country who don't have access to healthcare. And they're really, really scared to go to any doctors to get tests or whatever, because they're really fearful of the bill. So again, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have been talking about this. And again, as I've said in the very beginning, the coronavirus is an illuminator, a signifier of the troubles in our country and in the rest of the world, and hopefully will represent a catalyst moving forward to make all these, to create these solutions with all these problems. So I want to turn over right now to DJ Peterson, who is a geopolitical expert. You may have seen him on CNN and other parts of other news channels, and he writes a lot. And he's been helpful to me to inform me about how I'm supposed to think and my clients are supposed to think about geopolitical issues. And since I know a lot about being an American and what America is, I thought it would be a good time to bring DJ in to briefly talk about, because we have a lot to cover in the other buckets of what's happening outside the United States. So DJ, how can everybody say hi to DJ Peterson? I'm so glad that you're here. We just had a really good conversation about what's happening geopolitically, and maybe you could just illuminate some of the things that we discussed.
Sure, happy to. First of all, just a little bit of background. I'm a political scientist, so I look at the world from a political lens, and Longview is a consulting firm that advises business leaders, really helping them think about the connections between politics and society, economics, and business. And so obviously we're really busy right now trying to understand this crisis. And first of all, I think it's really important to understand that you have two crises going on. One is a healthcare crisis, and the other is an economic crisis. And then in some ways, you've got a political problem. And I'll get to that in a second. But I think I wanted to give you a global perspective on what's going on. And we hear a lot about the United States and the news in the United States, but the global context is also very important, I think, especially for understanding the market volatility. And this pandemic, right? Pandemic means everywhere. It means it's global. And I think it's really important to understand that this is a global crisis. In some ways, you can think of the other major crises that we've lived through in the United States and not too distant past. 9/11 was also a function, you could think of it as a function of globalization, where it was kind of a political Islam, an attack on the United States. The global financial crisis, obviously global, it was a crisis, a financial crisis, but it emanated from the United States largely and bled around the world. This crisis has elements of both that I think are very important to keep in mind. It's an external, it came from abroad, and it's truly global. And if you think about that map that Brad used to illustrate at the very beginning, that was a global map. And I think that is also part of the challenge that we face as business leaders, as decision makers, is what we're seeing is global reporting. We've been following it very closely in places, of course, like China, Italy, South Korea, rest of Europe, and now the United States. And so we have a perception of a global threat. And remember, this comes at a time when there's been a lot of questions about globalizations and the risks it presents to us as individuals or as societies or communities or as companies. And
Yeah,
so this
DJ,
is,
yeah, DJ, that's awesome in terms of a global perspective, but is there anything we should know in terms of how separate countries are responding to the crisis in contrast to...
It's been very interesting. As much as you see this kind of headline about that, the epidemic, what we see is actually somewhat haphazard actions by individual countries to address it. We all know what happened in the United States during the month of February, where we saw a lot of denial or slow response, but actually that was happening in other countries as well. The response time has been very slow. I think more importantly, again, what's undermining the markets is the two factors: a lack of global leadership and global cooperation. Now, if you look back to 9/11, the United States led the response globally. If you look at the global financial crisis, the US really drove a response, and it was with our partner countries, the major economies known as the G7, as you can imagine, but also countries like China and Russia stepped in. So China, for instance, instituted a massive stimulus program that was equivalent to about 13% of their GDP. And so China kept growing through the global financial crisis, and its demand for steel and coal and all kinds of materials actually kept the global economy going. I tell clients that China was one reason why General Motors survived, just because they were manufacturing and selling so many cars in China during the global financial crisis. What you see now is very different. As you know, the United States is pursuing America First policy. And so you see our government, our White House, really focused on the United States. We're not taking a global leadership perspective. You have the new leadership in the European Union. They're pursuing a Europe First approach. And then within the EU, you have countries that are actually kind of pursuing their own national strategies. And one of I think the key signals of this anti-global approach is the raising of national borders and stopping flow of people across borders. It's very important. A very notable event that happened on Sunday, the EU banned the export of medical equipment outside its borders. So a very, very, I think, again, a Europe First perspective. Finally, China right now is very preoccupied internally. It's dealing with its own domestic crisis, and it is focused on the epidemic response. It's actually not playing a big role, or it's not stimulating its economy very much. And so you see you obviously understand that the Chinese economy has been hit very hard. So its force in the global economy is
so DJ, would you say that this is a signifier of the conversation, again, the coronavirus being a signifier of all the problems that are leading up to this, the conversation about nationalism?
Right, it plays into it. Mm-hmm. It really does. And again, if you look at the emphasis on borders, on stopping people from moving, in the United States, the way the president has talked about it, I think is very significant. They did announce that the Canadian border would be closed, but it was also added, and I think this week, between Monday, Tuesday, and today, that you're seeing more conversation about cooperation and coordination. And so apparently, the decision to close the U.S.-Canadian border was made collaboratively by both countries. And that's significant if that's actually real. But the key point is that the markets want to see very big economic fiscal packages They also want to see that they're coordinated between countries and that they're coordinated with monetary policy. So we just don't see this coordination, and this is creating this perception of ad hocery. And you also see it in the United States. New York is doing something, Los Angeles is doing something, small towns are doing something, and then of course you have companies, as Brad alluded to earlier. Some companies are doing this, other companies are doing that. And so it just creates this narrative of kind of like herky-jerky or willy-nilly, adds to the theme of chaos. And it is really a kind of global geopolitical state.
Thank you so much. So I like that you gave me a segue to talk about China and our relationship. So, one of the things that people have been saying is that, would we have been able to contain the virus as China claims that they are actually doing right now? And sorry, I just have a little bit. Okay. Okay, so internet stable. Sorry, I had to move because internet was unstable over there. So this is how China was making sure that they were all quarantining themselves, wearing face masks, and what we're calling social distancing right now.
别看了，这是咱们村的无人机啊！
We had
你不
drones
戴口罩就不要出去，不要乱跑，记得赶紧回家，回家洗洗手，对吧？注意一下卫生。
串门只串自家门。
大爷，这是非常时期，你不戴口罩又往外跑，别笑了，赶紧骑你的3轮车回家，对吧？没事别往出跑，你看口罩也不戴，你还看啥？赶紧走，对吧？
This was a while ago.
小朋友，现在是非常时期，别在外面溜达，口罩也没戴，赶快往家走。现在这冠状病毒多严重啊！快跑！别再出来了啊！在家好好待着，为社会做贡献。
So, people are saying, would our country ever be able to do something like that because they're communists and we're not? But the conversation around that, and DJ, we could talk about this later, is, does the government have the authority to get to that point? The one thing that is positive about that, which doesn't seem positive at all, is that they are forcing people to social distance and quarantine themselves, where it seems like even though there are kids partying in spring break and still, hanging out in restaurants, right now I don't think we're at that point, but it's just interesting to see how we're different culturally. By the way, DJ, since you're somebody I know, was that video clear? Were you able to see that?
You could see the video, you got the message, yeah.
All right, cool. I just want to make sure the technology is okay. But the sound wasn't that good. Okay. We'll get there. It's baby steps. So there's been a conversation, this is also an illuminator, coronavirus, of racism, right? And the coronavirus outbreak, obviously the first time we knew about it was because it started in Wuhan. And Trump even tweeted yesterday and called it the Chinese virus. And that is not helping geopolitical relationships between us and China. And, this actually was an op-ed, if you missed it, very interesting, by chief editor of the Hong Kong Economic Journal, who questions that, could we look at it as a Chinese disease because of two things. One is that, they have this culture of whistleblowing, basically didn't talk about the coronavirus until 2 weeks later and basically quarantined the doctor who basically told us that it's here. And then the other thing, in China, there's still a culture of what they call Jinbu. And Jinbu is about eating natural animals and plants, mainly raw, to help fill themselves with external animal spirits so that they can live healthier. So, one of the things is that to prevent blindness, they actually eat the feces or the blood of bats. And people are saying that bats is one of the reasons why the coronavirus started. And of course, that's ridiculous to, blame a country, especially now in a world of what I call cultural diffusion or global diffusion of people all over the world spreading germs. And also, as I said, the coronavirus as an illumination or signifier of the problems in our world. Climate change and urbanization causes these type of germs or viruses to erupt as well. But because of all this, the Chinese are basically fighting back, especially now since they say that the number of cases are reversing. And there was a tweet. Where did that go? Sorry. That I just showed where, the Chinese official was defending himself for it not being a Chinese virus. And because of that, China is banning all U.S. nationals working for the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, whose press credentials end in 2020. This was just released from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the People's Republic of China. And basically they said that they are, in response to the discriminatory restrictions the U.S. has imposed on Chinese journalists with regard to visa, administrative review, and reporting, China will take reciprocal measures against American journalists. And I actually went to the China Daily, which is their main newspaper or media source there, and you could see that there's so much other stuff on the front page than just the coronavirus. And the main story here is that China rejects the US virus stigma. So this East versus West theme is a growing conversation as well. And it also illuminates racism. If we have time at the end, there is this great, again, I'll put in the video, that was created in Canada about, I could show the whole thing, but obviously this was before because people aren't social distancing, but it was this organization giving out hand sanitizer to stop the spread, but it's really stopping the spread of racism, so, and, a lot of Chinese Canadians are, not getting good vibes from people in the country, and there's a lot of racial feelings against the Chinese Canadians. So, this is actually a really good emotional video, but again, a crisis illuminates the cultural problems. And again, our hope is to change that in a different direction. Another thing that we aren't really talking about is what's happening with all the refugees, but we could drill down on that later. All right, we talked about that. I'll talk about that next week. Okay, so let's move over to technology, and then I want to go into consumers and consumer-facing brands, since I know many of you are in that space and confused and stagnated. But Kevin Roose in the New York Times wrote a really interesting op-ed about how, because like I said, the digital paradox, how technology has been, so distracting for us. Now we can actually change our relationship with technology and learn how to use it for the best, learn how to use it positively. I actually wrote a piece which was a newsletter a couple weeks ago, about how, in terms of thinking about work, we've been so burnt out. I think Kronos, which is an HR firm, said that 90 to 95% of people who quit were because of burnout or other mental mental health issues. And, is this a good time, once we get used to it, to reboot the way that we work and connect with people? One of the things that this could cause is that since we're learning not to travel or not even leave our house, but this was before, I wrote this before the self quarantines and the us all not communicating with the rest of the world physically, that, if we learn how to work with each other like this, then we'll reduce the carbon footprint through traveling. So that is one thing that is interesting about technology. I also said that the big tech companies can come up and basically, use their data and all the power that they have to come up in front and help us all. Our president, basically said that Google was going to create things for us. They actually said that they actually are. Facebook said that they are doing everything in their power to reduce misinformation and fake news. And if people are talking about the coronavirus, it's going to take them right to the CDC website. YouTube is doubling down in terms of creating automated systems to moderate content. Alibaba even is sending respirators over to the United States because of all the money they've been making through e-commerce, and they're sending test kits and masks to the United States. One of the technology companies is creating an aggregator of 24,000 coronavirus-related research papers that reside in one place. And so in terms of where these technology companies could really step up, they're starting to do that. Facebook announced that they're going to give $1,000 to all of their employees. So let's shift to the brand conversation. So what do? Brands were the ones that really stepped up in front to be global leaders and talk about global issues. And now there's really a problem between, how do I stay in business? And a lot of small businesses are, scared and don't know what to do, and not be so, not illuminating that they're taking advantage of the coronavirus to also stay in business. So, as a brand, what do you basically do? And, if we look at the advertising industry, the coronavirus is expected to, and this is basically by eMarketer, and it said that the global ad spend is expected to increase this year to $691.7 billion, down from an earlier estimate of $712. But this could again change for the worse if the 2020 Summer Olympics in Japan are ultimately canceled, which is probably going to be happening. There was this piece in the Business of Fashion that I read, which gives a great example of a small startup fashion designer, fashion brand who sells sweatpants and vintage sweatshirts. And basically, he sent a very casual email to everybody saying that, that there's an awkward and seemingly trivial question of what a brand does during a time like this. So he basically wrote in a conversational, informal style, opening up by describing the situation as the best, utterly confusing and all worst kind of terrifying, before to say that at the end of the message, the brand included an offer for 25% off its sweatshirts. Now, we're seeing so many of this. I mean, how many emails have we gotten? Probably you have sent it out that we're all thinking about you. This is a time of crisis. Meanwhile, we're doing what we're supposed to do by encouraging social distancing and closing our offices. But, we're offering this, or I'm even doing it with Culture Class. But how do you, step back and think about all that? We have to stay in business, but we also have to be sympathetic and not really take advantage of, of the cultural climate that we're living in now. The way to really promote your brand as being good in this world, I would say, is to make sure people know about what you're doing for your own employees and your customers. And I'll just give you a few examples here. Like I said, Facebook is giving $1,000 to every employee to help them amid the coronavirus pandemic. Go Facebook. I love Facebook. Airbnb is basically saying that they are going to support their hosts and be very attentive to them. So basically on Tuesday, yesterday, the co-founders sent up an email to the host saying that the firm allowed cancellations because it didn't want customers to put themselves in any unsafe situations and create a public health crisis. So, so basically, it's basically, instead of asking them to spend money, it's basically these brands telling them, we understand what you're going through. We're saving you money, and we're doing everything in our power to help you handle everything that you were experiencing before. Starbucks, they're expanding their mental health benefits, offers therapy to all U.S. workers. So again, the way that these brands are really showing themselves as great brands and connecting with their consumers is to show how great or what positive things they're doing for their consumers and especially their employees. Like I said, Jack Ma is shipping coronavirus test kits and masks to the United States. Positive brand image. I don't know if those of you in New York had seen this, but Reddit basically bought billboards to basically tell everybody what it means to flatten the curve and that they should go home and because that's saving lives. The Ad Council, which basically makes PSAs with different brands and big retailers and consumer-facing brands. They are basically working with the White House, the CDC, the HHS, and other networks to launch coronavirus PSAs. So should brands not really promote their brands, but focus more on PSAs, which really hasn't happened yet. I don't know if any of you have been watching, I'm sure many of you have been watching CNN, but you are seeing these ads like from Peloton, from Talkspace, from, I think it's pronounced Rakuten, which is the Indian first e-commerce site, that are really connecting with the cultural nerve or the consumer nerve to get them to, how should I say this, to invest in their brands. So many people are getting Peloton. So, again, people need these things, but they're really taking advantage of this. So you can see the two different ways brands are communicating with consumers. LVMH, this is a great example of a brand doing good for the world, where they're using their perfume factories to create more disinfectant gel to prevent the hand sanitizer shortage. And just other brand stuff that I found really interesting is that Time Out renames themselves Time In, and other things that brands and people are doing to really help the world as we're all stuck in our own homes is theaters are putting their plays on film so that they could be seen and enjoyed. The gaming is at its, I think there are more games being downloaded now than ever before, which is a good segue into one of the things that I wanted to talk about, which is we've been talking a lot about e-commerce and direct-to-consumer technology and brands, as well as these new streaming platforms. We saw in the last month that Disney Plus launched, Apple TV launched, and obviously we've seen Netflix and Amazon Prime and Hulu being part of the zeitgeist for a while. In April and May, there were 3 others that were supposed to be launched. There was Peacock, which is the NBC Universal Comcast direct-to-consumer online streaming device. We also had Quibi, which was Jeffrey Katzenberg's and Meg Whitman's company that's creating 10-minute videos on mobile. We also we're going to have HBO Max, which is owned by AT&T, which was going to be their streaming platform. So there's two ways of looking at this. Are people going to be creating more content? All right. Or so it's like, oh my God, I watched everything on Netflix. Is it time to, get another streaming platform? Or are they going to actually not be known about because we are so concerned about other things right now? And then the third thing is, are people going to want to spend more money on other streaming platforms? So in terms of the media business, it's definitely helping people to be staying at home and watching things. But what does this mean for the future? Obviously, the movie business and Broadway are really, and concerts. And I believe here's Entertainment Weekly's piece about, every single cancellation and of everything that's happening in pop culture, which again, I'll put in the email. So, and then the other thing is, Universal Pictures is one of the great examples of them saying, all movies that have been canceled in the theater are going to be streaming from you. Again, coronavirus as a catalyst. These media companies that I've been working for forever have been like, okay, should we just end theaters and just stream at home? Or should we do it? It's called day and date. At the same time that it's released, you watch in the theater, and you could also watch on Netflix like they did with Roma. But what does this mean? It's the coronavirus that are actually pushing all these consumer-facing companies, media companies, to actually do this. I did say gaming usage is up 75%. And I'm just going to go through some of these other things. Big Brother last night, I don't know if you knew this pop culturally, but they were actually stuck in the house together, no social distancing, their own hot tubs and drinking. They did not know about the coronavirus, and they were actually just told last night, and this is German Big Brother, and there have been videos of them seeing like how shocked they are and what this means. But again, I like to illuminate what's happening in pop culture. Because we can't have toilet paper, bidets are actually broadening people's, there are bidet companies, especially this one in Brooklyn, that's actually getting a lot of business. So it's interesting to see. Even a couple weeks ago, DoorDash said that they were going to go public, and everybody was like, this is ridiculous. Nobody likes them. They're charging 30% to restaurants for delivering. It's really hard for business. It's really hard to connect. And people thought that it was just going to be a disaster. And now we can see how all these restaurants, startups, and Uber Eats actually is sending food out for no delivery charge. So we can see how these other businesses are rising in power right now. When it comes to startups, really hard right now to fundraise. It's really hard to get people to actually get meetings with venture capitalists. And, that's problematic for especially all the startups. But Sam Ackman of Y Combinator basically said that he's focusing right now on every type of healthcare startup idea that he could possibly listen to, so that we can never do this again. It's also kicking him right in the ass and everybody else, saying that like healthcare is obviously the problem of today. So if anybody has healthcare ideas, go contact Sam Ackman. And then just some of the other things that I found interesting about what people are doing to help people get through this crisis. You've been seeing all these video conferences, whether it's culture class or anything else, yoga, workouts, etc. It's been amazing. Everybody's really helping their community, online dinner parties and drinking. But there have been very influential people who have taken the time to help us all through this. This is Sheryl Sandberg and her husband talking about social distancing. If you missed it, Mel Brooks's son is talking in a humorous way about how Mel Brooks can't, spread the virus to, all of his friends who are in the same age group. That China actually was talking about how they're having online dance parties. In fact, what's his name? Platt the guy who is in Dear Evan Hansen. He's having these online dance parties that he basically told everybody to join on Instagram. Ben Platt, he's throwing online dance parties. Chrissy Teigen is basically doing these things on Instagram to show everybody what to do with their kids. One of the things that she said, and I'm actually staying with my brother and my sister-in-law who have a 1-year-old and a 3.5-year-old, put all these fun things in a bucket, collect shells, sing a song, practice spelling and put it into a big basket, and they pick something every day. So, influential people are really coming to the forefront. Yo-Yo Ma is basically laying songs on Twitter to help us all, focus and be equanimous, peaceful, and balanced. And then the last thing that I don't really have much time to talk about is one of the main issues of our day has been mental health issues. Even before this, and how is this going to really impact all the people who were suffering beforehand and now have this catalyst? And we could talk a whole culture class on that, which hopefully you'll join me next week and I'll talk more about it. And by the way, anybody, brad@zeitguy.com, if you want other subjects for me to go over, happy to. But anyway, I actually was just written in the Hollywood Reporter where we're talking about different apps to, help with mental health. And this is a good time for it. Dan Harris, who's the ABC News correspondent, basically had a panic attack, nervous breakdown, went on a retreat for meditation, has an app. This is Bloom, which is a day-to-day cognitive behavioral app. And I actually gave a quote, basically said, I've been to all types of therapists in the last 2 decades, and they find cognitive behavioral therapy that teaches you actually tools to be the most transformative. So every day and every week they have a theme, whether it's loneliness, gaining confidence, self-love, joy, anxiety. And I feel that this is a great app that you can download to help with mental health that you are dealing with. Calm is the meditation app that has been very popular. And then there's a couple others. Again, George Takei has one. Helium basically provides a library of guided meditations offering virtual reality. State breathing is helping us breathe. And unplugging, well, we have a different relationship with technology now. We don't have to unplug because now we could use it for positivity. So I'm going to wrap up with that. So thank you. This was an experiment. I usually have smaller classes and we interact and people ask questions, but I'm grateful that you all, spent your time, spending an hour with me. And I just got a question just from somebody on chat saying that where am I right now? I am not in my apartment in New York City. I had my 45th birthday on Friday, so I decided to spend it with my brother, his wife, and his kids. So I'm going to be here for a while. I'm grateful that I'm here. It's a beautiful place, beautiful nature. I just miss all my friends and all the people that work with me. And I hope we could all stay connected on this culture class. And I wish you all the best. Not easy, but just know that we're all in this together. And like I said, the trend for 2020 that I said before that is that the only way to disrupt the way that we've been dealing with in the last 10 years, the last few years that have been really, really challenging for us, is reboot our sense of humanity. And if there's anything that comes from all this, I think we're going to be back to the stages of really caring and loving other people. And I know most people on this culture class have that same attitude. So let's keep this community going. Let's all keep learning together. Like I said, I'm going to bring another expert. I think next time I want to talk about retail and consumer products. Thank you so much. I'm at brad@zeitguy.com, at Bradgrow, and love you all. And hopefully I'll see you next week. Thanks.